Going to a job interview, the woman saw a photo of her mother in a dark frame on the millionaire's desk. Later it was discovered. Anna had always known that she was meant for something more. Growing up in the small, sleepy town of Riverton, she felt stifled by the slow pace of life and the narrow expectations that seemed to define her future. The town's few paved streets wound past old brick houses and faded shops that whispered of past glories, but Anna had bigger dreams. She spent her days working at a local bookstore, but every evening after the store closed, her mind would wander to the bustling world beyond. A world of ambition, success, and opportunity. She had long admired those who made it out of places like Riverton, people who had built empires from the ground up. As a child, she would devour books on entrepreneurship, success stories of people who had risen from nothing to wealth, and documentaries on influential figures. The idea of working for someone like James Harrison, a millionaire businessman known for his sharp mind and ruthless ambition, filled her with both excitement and terror. Her mother, Diane, often warned her about the dangers of people like James. Diane was protective, her own experiences in life leaving her cautious and wary of those who seemed too powerful. She had always kept Anna close, sheltering her from the harsh realities of the world. But Anna wasn't like her mother. She didn't want to be tied down to Riverton, to the life her mother had carved out for them. She wanted to prove that she was capable of something greater. Despite the warmth of home, the heavy weight of her mother's care had always felt more like a chain than a comfort. Anna's dreams were filled with the promise of independence, and she longed for the day when she could leave Riverton behind. The only thing standing in her way was her mother, who didn't understand why Anna was so eager to escape. As Anna prepared for the most important interview of her life, a job that could take her far from everything she knew, her heart pounded with anticipation. This wasn't just a chance to get a job, it was the key to the life she had always dreamed of. But no matter how much she yearned for success, a part of her couldn't help but wonder if her mother's warnings had some truth. Was she ready to face the consequences of her ambitions? Anna stood before the mirror in her small bedroom, adjusting her blouse for the umpteenth time. The soft rustle of fabric was the only sound in the room as she meticulously smoothed the creases of her skirt. She had practiced her answers over and over again, but now that the moment was finally here, nerves threatened to undo her careful composure. It was just an interview, she told herself. Just a conversation. Yet it felt like so much more. This was the opportunity she had dreamed of for years. An opportunity that could change her life forever. She glanced at the clock. The meeting with James Harrison was in less than an hour, and yet she still felt unprepared. The mirror didn't lie. She was young, eager, and perhaps too inexperienced. What did someone like James see in a small-town girl like her? Anna had researched everything there was to know about the millionaire businessman. His career, his wealth, his sharp reputation, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he would see right through her, as though her ambitions were nothing more than a flimsy disguise. Anna's phone buzzed from the desk, a message from her mother. Don't forget to be careful, Anna. The world isn't what it seems. There are people out there who will take advantage of you. Anna sighed, her chest tightening. She had heard these words so many times before, each one heavy with caution and concern. Her mother was protective, almost to the point of suffocation. When Anna had told her she'd been selected for an interview with James Harrison, her mother had reacted with unease, speaking in vague terms about the dangers of dealing with wealthy, powerful men. But Anna wasn't like her mother. She wasn't afraid of taking risks. She wasn't afraid of stepping into unknown territory, even if it meant leaving the safety of Riverton behind. She had dreams of a career that would define her, dreams of a life that wasn't dictated by the past. Anna refused to let her mother's fears hold her back. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her coat and made her way to the door. Her mother was waiting downstairs as usual, her eyes full of silent worry. Anna tried to smile to ease the tension, but it was impossible. There was a palpable heaviness between them that had only grown as Anna's ambitions had expanded beyond the small, familiar world they had built together. "Good luck, sweetheart," her mother said quietly, her voice full of love and unspoken concern. "I'll be fine, Mom," Anna replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is what I've been working for." As she stepped out the door, Anna couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She knew her mother only wanted to protect her, but Anna also knew she had to forge her own path. And that path led her far away from Riverton, and most of all, away from her mother's constant watchful eyes. The drive to the city was a blur, her mind racing with thoughts of the interview, the possibilities, and the weight of the decision that lay ahead. When she finally arrived at the towering office building, her nerves were nearly unbearable. The polished glass walls gleamed in the sunlight, and the sleek modern lobby smelled of freshly brewed coffee and polished wood. This was a world far removed from the humble bookstore she had worked at for so long. But as she stepped onto the elevator and ascended to the top floor, Anna felt a surge of determination. This was her moment. No matter how daunting or intimidating it seemed, she was ready. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Anna stepped into the stark modern lobby of James Harrison's office. The space was immaculate, filled with polished marble floors and sleek, minimalistic furniture that seemed to absorb sound rather than reflect it. A soft light filtered through tall windows that framed a view of the city skyline, a city that now felt like a far-off dream, too distant to touch. Anna's heart raced as she approached the receptionist's desk, the woman behind it greeting her with a practiced smile. "Ms. Harrison is expecting you," she said, motioning toward a hallway that led deeper into the building. "Please follow me." As they walked down the long corridor, Anna tried to steady her breath. The walls were lined with abstract art, each piece more expensive and refined than anything she had ever seen in Riverton. It felt as if she were walking through a gallery, surrounded by the fruits of a world she had never been part of, and yet desperately wanted to join. Finally, they reached a set of heavy wooden doors that opened into James Harrison's office. The moment Anna stepped inside, she felt both awed and dwarfed by the sheer opulence. The space was grand but cold, filled with towering bookshelves, sleek leather furniture, and a massive, imposing desk made of dark mahogany. Behind it sat James Harrison himself, tall, composed, and impossibly confident. He stood up as Anna entered, offering her a smile that, while polite, held a certain distance. He extended his hand, and Anna shook it, her palm feeling small in his firm grasp. "Anna, it's a pleasure to meet you. Please have a seat," James said, his voice smooth, but with a hint of authority that made her feel both nervous and intrigued. As she sat down across from him, she felt the weight of the space around them, the years of success and wealth that hung in the air like a tangible presence. James Harrison didn't just inhabit this office. He owned it, and Anna couldn't help but wonder if she would ever truly belong in a place like this. But then her gaze drifted to the desk, specifically to the dark-framed photograph placed slightly off-center near a stack of papers. The woman in the photo was beautiful, her face soft yet somehow hardened by the weight of something unspoken. Her dark hair framed her face in soft waves, and her eyes held a depth that seemed to call out to Anna, even though the image was in black and white. Anna's breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she forgot the interview entirely. There was something so familiar about this woman. Her features, so striking, so captivating, reminded Anna of something deep within herself, a connection she couldn't quite place. James followed Anna's gaze, and she quickly tore her eyes away from the photo, embarrassed by her sudden distraction. He didn't seem to mind, though, and a small smile played at the corners of his lips. "That's Evelyn," he said, his voice softening as he spoke. "My late wife." His words hung in the air for a moment, and Anna's curiosity only deepened. She had heard of James's late wife before. Everyone in the business world had, but there had never been much said beyond the fact that she had passed away years ago. But now, seeing the softness in his eyes as he spoke of her, Anna felt as if there were a story there, something untold, something deeply personal. Evelyn was someone special, James continued, his gaze momentarily distant. "I still miss her every day." Anna nodded, her throat tightening as she tried to focus on the interview, but her mind kept returning to that photograph. Evelyn. There was something about her. Something Anna couldn't quite explain. She wanted to ask more, To know who this woman was beyond the elegant smile and the cold frame, but she had a job to do. This was her moment to prove herself, to show that she was more than just a small-town girl. But even as she forced herself to stay in the present, a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that the photo, and the woman in it, held the key to something much bigger than this job, something that was about to change her life forever. The interview continued with James Harrison asking her typical questions about her experience and qualifications. Anna responded with confidence, her rehearsed answers flowing more easily now. She spoke of her background in marketing and the skills she'd honed at her small-town job, but as she spoke, her mind wandered back to her dreams, the ones that had kept her going through sleepless nights and countless sacrifices. She wasn't just looking for a job, she was looking for a life. "I want more than just to get by," Anna said. Her voice steady but laced with an intensity she hadn't fully realized until now. "I want to build something big. I want to make an impact. I'm not just looking for a paycheck. I want to prove that someone from my background can succeed in a world like this." James leaned back in his chair, his gaze unwavering as he listened. Anna wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Was she just another young, ambitious woman trying to make it in a cutthroat world? Did her story even matter to him? "There's a lot of competition, Anna," he said, his tone neutral yet thoughtful. "What makes you different?" For a moment, Anna felt a rush of panic, but then the answer came to her, clear and certain. She was different because she had the fire inside her. She had the hunger to do more than just survive. She wanted to thrive, to leave her small-town life behind and build something that mattered. "I'm not afraid to work hard," Anna said, her voice gaining strength. "And I don't come with baggage. I'm focused, and I'm willing to sacrifice everything for success. I've been doing it my whole life. That's what sets me apart." James studied her, his expression unreadable, before giving a slow nod. "Ambition is a powerful thing. But ambition without purpose can be dangerous." His words echoed in Anna's mind long after he said them, but she pushed them aside. She didn't have time to think about purpose, not when her dreams were so close to being within reach. She had to stay focused. As the interview continued, Anna's frustration with her mother grew in the background of her thoughts. Her mother had always told her to be cautious, be careful with people who had too much power or too much money. She had warned Anna not to trust people like James Harrison. But Anna had grown tired of hearing it. Every time she mentioned her dreams, her mother's response was the same. "Don't get too big for your britches, Anna. Remember where you came from." In Riverton, it was always the same narrative. Small-town girls didn't make it. They married young, had kids, and lived simple lives. That was the path her mother had chosen, and in many ways, she wanted Anna to choose it too. But Anna wanted something else. She wanted to escape the limited possibilities of her past, the constant feeling of being defined by where she came from. The gap between Anna and her mother seemed to widen each day. Her mother's warnings, though well-intentioned, felt like chains, holding her back from the life she knew she was meant to live. Her heart ached with a quiet frustration. How could she make her mother understand that this was her moment? That the life she dreamed of, one of independence and success, wasn't something to fear, but something to be embraced? Despite her focus on the interview, Anna couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something was missing in her understanding of the situation. She had to admit, the photo of Evelyn on the desk still lingered in her mind, distracting her. Every few moments, her eyes would flicker toward the dark frame, and she couldn't help but be drawn to the woman's striking features. Evelyn's eyes seemed to peer directly at her, as though trying to say something, though the photograph remained silent. Anna tried to ignore it. This was her chance to impress James, not to get lost in some strange, lingering connection with a dead woman. But just as she forced her attention back to the conversation, James broke the silence, almost as if reading her mind. "The woman in the photo is my late wife, Evelyn," he said, his voice quieter than before. The softness with which he spoke was surprising, and it made Anna look up, meeting his eyes for the first time since the interview had started. His expression softened even more as he looked at the photo, and for a brief moment, Anna saw a flicker of something she couldn't place. Pain, nostalgia, longing? It was gone so quickly that Anna wasn't sure she had seen it at all, but she felt it, an echo of something raw, unspoken. Evelyn. The name felt heavy in the air. Anna's heart skipped a beat as she tried to reconcile the woman in the photo with the image of the strong, confident businessman sitting across from her. She'd heard whispers about James's late wife, the tragic story of her untimely death, but there had always been gaps in the narrative. No one seemed to know much about Evelyn beyond the fact that she had died young. But now, staring at the photograph, Anna wondered what Evelyn had been like. What had she meant to James? And why did it feel like her own fate was somehow intertwined with this woman's memory? James's tone shifted, pulling Anna back to the present. Evelyn passed away some years ago. It hasn't been easy, but you learn to move on eventually. Anna nodded, her thoughts still tangled in the mystery of Evelyn's life. She felt like there was something she wasn't being told, something hidden behind the sorrow in James's voice. She felt drawn to this woman she'd never met, but her curiosity remained carefully concealed beneath the professional demeanor she had worked so hard to maintain. As the interview drew to a close, Anna's mind was in turmoil. She was on the verge of a breakthrough in her career, but all she could think about was Evelyn and the strange pull the photograph seemed to have on her. Was it just a coincidence? Was she simply imagining the eerie sense of familiarity that seemed to resonate deep within her when she looked at the photo? The interview wrapped up, and James Harrison stood, extending his hand toward Anna once again. "I think you'll be a great fit here, Anna. We'll be in touch soon," he said. His voice businesslike now, the warmth of the earlier conversation fading into polite professionalism. Anna smiled, shaking his hand, but her mind was elsewhere. She had gotten the impression that James was impressed. He had asked her to send over her references, which she took as a positive sign, but the feeling of unease gnawed at her. As she left the building and made her way down the sleek, glass-lined hallway, the photograph lingered in her mind. The woman in the frame seemed to haunt her thoughts, and she couldn't escape the pull she felt toward Evelyn's image. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother, and for a moment, Anna considered ignoring it. She had promised herself she wouldn't talk about the interview with her mother right away. But the weight of the day, the intensity of the interview, the mystery of the photograph, it was all too much to hold inside. She needed to share it, needed to ask her mother if there was something she knew that Anna didn't. As she dialed her mother's number, a sense of dread washed over her. When her mother picked up, Anna could hear the tension in her voice. "Anna, how did it go?" her mother asked, though the question sounded more like a premonition. Anna hesitated for a moment, then decided to ask the one question that had been consuming her since she stepped out of James's office. "Mom, do you know who Evelyn is?" Anna's voice was casual, though her heart was pounding. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, so long that Anna wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice lower than usual. "Why do you ask about her?" "I saw a photo of her in James Harrison's office," Anna said, trying to keep the curiosity in her voice masked as casual interest. "He said she was his late wife. But, Mom, I don't know why, but I feel like I know her. I don't know how to explain it." Another long pause followed, and when her mother finally spoke again, her words were carefully measured. "Anna, the past is a place best left behind. Don't go digging into things you don't understand." Anna's heart skipped a beat. There was something in her mother's tone, a mixture of fear and regret, that made her pulse quicken. Whatever connection existed between her family and Evelyn, it wasn't something her mother wanted to revisit. But Anna couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story. More than what her mother was telling her. As Anna left James Harrison's towering office building, she felt as though she was stepping into a dream, and yet, something about it still felt like a nightmare. The elegant glass doors whooshed shut behind her with a soft thud, but she remained outside, rooted to the sidewalk, her heart still racing. The interview had gone well, perhaps even better than she'd expected, but the sense of unease gnawed at her, a strange weight pressing down on her chest. She could still feel the lingering gaze of the woman in the photograph, the way Evelyn's eyes seemed to follow her, even after she'd left the room. It was unsettling. Anna couldn't understand why this photograph, this woman, felt so familiar. Had she really seen Evelyn before, or was it simply the photograph itself, so hauntingly vivid, that sparked this irrational feeling of recognition? No, Anna thought, shaking her head as she stood on the sidewalk, staring at the bustling city around her. It was just her nerves playing tricks on her. She couldn't afford to get distracted. This was her chance to break free from the small-town life she had always known. She couldn't afford to lose focus now. Still, as she walked to the bus stop, she felt a rising sense of dread. Her mind kept replaying the moment when James had spoken of Evelyn with such melancholy. His late wife. But there had been something in his voice, something deep and unspoken, that hinted at a more complicated history. A history Anna wasn't sure she was ready to uncover. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her mother. Asterisk, how did it go? Will you be coming home soon? Asterisk. Anna stared at the text for a few moments, unsure how to respond. She had been planning to tell her mother everything, about the interview, the job, the picture, but something told her that it wasn't the right time. She needed to think about it more, make sense of everything before sharing it. After all, her mother had always been cautious about James Harrison, about men like him, and Anna had grown tired of hearing the warnings. Asterisk, don't get involved with powerful people, Anna. You never know what kind of danger they might bring into your life. Asterisk. Anna had always dismissed her mother's warnings. Her mother's view of the world was narrow, rooted in fear of what she didn't understand. But now, after seeing that photograph, Anna wasn't so sure. The connection between Evelyn and her mother, it couldn't just be a coincidence. Her mother had known Evelyn. But how? Before Anna could reply to her mother's text, the sound of her phone ringing startled her. It was her mother calling. Anna's stomach tightened. Hello, Anna said, trying to sound casual, though her voice betrayed her unease. Her mother's voice came through, strained and cautious. Anna, listen to me. There's something you need to understand. This isn't just about a job. Don't get caught up in things you don't understand. James Harrison is not the kind of man you think he is. And that woman in the photo, Evelyn, she's part of something you don't want to know about. Anna's heart raced. What are you talking about, Mom? Who is Evelyn really? Why won't you tell me more? There was a long pause on the other end of the line before her mother responded, her voice trembling. I can't explain it all over the phone. But Anna, you need to be careful. The past is buried for a reason. Don't dig it up. Some things are better left untouched. Anna's mind was spinning. She had to know more. There was something about Evelyn, something about her connection to James, that felt too important to ignore. I'll be home in a bit, Anna said, hanging up quickly before her mother could say anything more. When Anna arrived home later that afternoon, the house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Her mother was in the kitchen, washing dishes, but she stopped as soon as Anna walked through the door. Anna, we need to talk, her mother said, her voice low and urgent. You don't understand. You have to let this go. Anna stared at her mother, her pulse quickening. This wasn't the time for silence, for avoiding difficult truths. She had come too far, she needed answers. No, Mom, Anna said, her voice firm. I need to know. Who is Evelyn? What happened between you and James Harrison? Her mother's face paled, and she wiped her hands on a dish towel, her fingers trembling slightly. Anna had never seen her mother look so unsettled. The change was subtle, but it was there. Something hidden, something painful lurking behind her mother's eyes. Evelyn. Evelyn was a part of my past, her mother began slowly, her words careful, measured. But that's all she should be. A part of the past. Anna shook her head, refusing to back down. I don't believe that. There's more to this story. I saw the photo of her in James's office. You knew her, didn't you? You knew her well. Her mother's eyes flickered with a mixture of guilt and something else, a deep, aching sadness. She sighed and sat down at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the years had suddenly become too much to bear. I never wanted you to know, Anna, her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But I guess it's time you did. Anna sat across from her mother, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it. The moment when everything would come to light. Evelyn was my best friend, her mother continued. I met her when I was young and she was beautiful, lively, full of dreams. We were inseparable. And then I met James. He was a different man back then, charming, kind. He made me feel special, important. But there was always something about him that felt like he was hiding something that even he didn't understand. Anna's eyes widened. What happened? Her mother took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. James and I were in love, Anna. We were going to be married. But then I found out I was pregnant with you. I was terrified. I didn't think he was ready to be a father. He was already so focused on his career. And Evelyn, her voice broke for a moment and she swallowed hard. Evelyn was heartbroken. She loved him too. I couldn't stay, Anna. I couldn't live with the thought of tearing them apart. So I left. I moved away and raised you on my own. But Evelyn, she never forgave me. And James, he never forgave me either. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Her mother had been in love with James Harrison. And Evelyn had been her best friend, her confidant. Anna suddenly felt as though the world she had known was collapsing beneath her feet. And James, he doesn't know about you, Anna. Not until now, her mother said softly. I never told him. Couldn't. I thought if I kept you away from him, maybe it would protect you. The silence between them was thick, heavy with unspoken words. Anna's mind was a whirlwind, torn between disbelief and an overwhelming sense of understanding. Her mother had kept this secret for so long, but now it seemed everything was changing. The weight of her mother's words hung in the air, and Anna's head spun with the implications. She had always suspected that her mother's past held secrets, but she had never imagined anything like this. James Harrison, the man who could offer her the life she dreamed of, was also the man her mother had once loved. And Evelyn, the woman who had haunted Anna's thoughts all day, was tied to that love in ways she hadn't fully understood. Anna stood up, her emotions swirling. So I'm connected to him. To James, she said quietly, almost to herself. Her mother nodded slowly. It's possible, Anna. He's the father I never told you about. But I didn't want you to know. I didn't want you to get caught up in that world. Anna's chest tightened as the realization hit her with full force. James Harrison might be her father. The man she had just interviewed with, the man who had offered her a job, might be her biological father. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Anna asked, her voice breaking. Her mother's face twisted in regret. I thought it was better this way, Anna. I thought you'd be safer, away from him. Away from the man who couldn't be the father you deserved. But now you have to decide for yourself what you want. Anna took a deep breath, her thoughts racing. Everything she thought she knew about her life had just been turned upside down. And yet, as she stood there, facing the truth for the first time, she realized that nothing could be undone. The past had been hidden for so long, but now it was here, in the open, waiting for her to face it. What would she do next? The days following her confrontation with her mother were an emotional blur for Anna. She couldn't shake the sense of disbelief that lingered, making it hard to focus on anything else. Her life, everything she thought she knew about her family, had been turned upside down. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw James's face, the man who had hired her, who seemed so distant yet so familiar now. Was he really her father? The idea that James Harrison, the millionaire businessman, could be her father was something Anna could hardly fathom. It felt like a dream, a surreal twist of fate that she had no control over. She spent hours replaying the conversation with her mother in her mind. Her mother's voice, so soft, so regretful, echoed in her head. Asterisk, I thought it was better this way, Anna. I thought you'd be safer. Asterisk. But safe from what? From who? Safe from James. Or was her mother trying to protect her from the pain of an unknown truth, one that would force Anna to reckon with a past that had been hidden from her for so long? The more Anna thought about it, the more confused she became. She had always wanted more from life, more than the small-town confines she had grown up in. She had wanted the opportunity to make a name for herself, to prove that she was capable of achieving something greater. Now, that dream seemed intertwined with a man she barely knew, and a past she never imagined. The questions piled up, one on top of the other. What had happened between her mother and James? Why had she left him? Why had her mother kept the truth from her for all these years? Anna had to know the answers. But the uncertainty gnawed at her. Even if James was her father, would he accept her? Would he want anything to do with her? She wasn't sure how to navigate this new reality, but one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore the growing need to confront James again, to get answers from him directly. The next morning, Anna made the decision to visit James Harrison's office. She had no plan, no rehearsed speech, but she knew she couldn't keep going in circles, caught between the fragments of the truth. She needed to see James again. Walking into his office felt like stepping into another world. The polished wood floors, the sleek, modern furniture, everything about this space screamed success. James sat behind his massive desk, his expression calm, yet there was a subtle wariness in his eyes as he looked up at her from his paperwork. He had clearly been expecting her. "Anna, I'm glad you're here," he said. His voice warm but distant, as if he were trying to mask something behind his professional demeanor. Anna hesitated before she spoke, her throat tight. The words she needed to say had been building inside her all week, but they were harder to express than she had imagined. Finally, after a long pause, she blurted out, "I need to know about my mother. And Evelyn. And you." James's eyebrows furrowed, and for the first time since their first meeting, he seemed unsure, almost caught off guard. He sat back in his chair, his eyes briefly closing as if gathering his thoughts. He had always been so composed, so in control, but now there was a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. "I know you're confused, Anna," he said, his tone quiet but firm. "I know this is a lot to take in. But the truth isn't simple. Your mother. She made a choice a long time ago to keep you away from me. I never wanted to hurt her, or you." Anna's chest tightened. The air between them felt thick with unspoken truths, and she wasn't sure if she could bear the weight of them. But she pressed on, refusing to back down. "You loved her, didn't you?" Anna asked, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "You loved my mother. And Evelyn. What happened to her?" James's gaze softened, but there was an undeniable sadness in his eyes. He stood up slowly, walking over to the large window that overlooked the city. "Evelyn was the love of my life, but she was also my greatest regret. Our lives were tangled in ways that we couldn't escape. I loved your mother too, Anna, but she left when she found out she was pregnant. She didn't think I could be the man she needed, the father you deserved." Anna felt her stomach twist. There it was, the confession that her mother had left out, the missing piece of the puzzle. But there was more, something deeper in James's words that made her feel as though she had stumbled into an even darker secret. "So, what about me?" Anna's voice was barely a whisper. "What does all of this mean for me?" James turned around slowly, his face solemn. "It means you have a choice to make, Anna. You can choose to accept me, to know me for who I am, or you can walk away. I can't make that decision for you." The silence between them was heavy, but Anna finally found the strength to speak again. "I want to know the truth. All of it. I need to know who I am," she said. Her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. James's eyes lingered on her for a moment, as if searching for something he wasn't sure he would find. Then finally he nodded. "I think you already know, Anna," he said softly. "But I'll tell you everything. I owe you that much." It wasn't until later that day, when James invited Anna to a more private meeting in his home, that the full truth came to light. The house was eerily quiet, far removed from the buzz of his office. The moment they sat down, James spoke candidly, not shying away from the painful details of his past. "You were born at a time when everything was uncertain," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "Evelyn was my anchor, but she was also my downfall. After she passed, I couldn't bring myself to remarry, to open my heart again. I thought if I focused on building my career, it would keep the pain at bay. But I always wondered about you, Anna. I always wondered if you were mine. The revelation hit Anna harder than she anticipated. For so long, she had been unsure of her place in the world. But now, hearing James's words, she understood just how much he had struggled with this same question. You never wanted to be part of my life, Anna said, the bitterness rising in her chest. I was just a forgotten part of the past, something that didn't fit into your world. James's expression softened, and for the first time, Anna saw the depth of regret in his eyes. I never wanted you to feel abandoned, Anna. I didn't know how to be a father. I thought I wasn't capable of giving you what you needed, so I kept my distance. A long silence followed. Anna's mind raced, torn between the anger she felt for the years of uncertainty, and the need to understand, to make sense of this tangled web of emotions. I don't know how to feel, Anna whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know who I am anymore. James stood up, walking over to where Anna sat. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle. You are my daughter, Anna. Whether you want to accept that or not, you have a right to know the truth. And I'm here now. I'll be here for you if you'll let me. Anna looked up at him, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. She had always dreamed of being more than what she was, but now she wasn't sure what that meant anymore. Could she embrace this new reality? Could she reconcile the truth of her family with the life she had always imagined for herself? The answer wasn't clear. But Anna knew deep down that she couldn't turn away from it. She had come too far, and the journey ahead, though uncertain, was hers to take. The weeks that followed were a blur of emotions and changes. Anna's relationship with James, though still new and fragile, had begun to take shape. At first, there was hesitation, a distance between them that neither of them could fully bridge. But slowly, James began to make an effort. He invited Anna to his home on several occasions, trying to make up for lost time, attempting to build a bond where one had never been allowed to grow. Anna was still grappling with the weight of it all. There was so much she didn't understand, so many questions she had yet to ask. But she felt something shifting within her. Something that had been buried under layers of pain and confusion was beginning to thaw. James, though imperfect and scarred by his own regrets, was trying. And that meant more to her than she had initially thought possible. Her mother, though reluctant at first, was also part of this slow process of healing. When Anna told her that she'd been meeting with James, her mother's reaction had been one of quiet acceptance. There were no more harsh words or refusals. Instead, her mother had gone silent, lost in her own thoughts, her own memories of a past that she had buried so deeply. But in time, she agreed to meet James once more. It was a fragile reunion, one that began with a quiet dinner in the Harrison mansion. Anna watched as her mother and James exchanged polite greetings, the awkwardness hanging heavy between them like a thick fog. Anna, sitting between them, felt the weight of the years of silence, the unspoken emotions that hovered just beneath the surface. Over dinner, James tried to break the ice, speaking softly about the memories he and her mother shared. Do you remember the time we went to Paris? He asked her mother. His voice tinged with nostalgia. It was the first time we saw the Eiffel Tower together. You were wearing that red scarf that you loved. Her mother's eyes softened at the memory, though her lips remained sealed. She glanced at Anna, and Anna could almost hear the thoughts swirling in her mind. She was realizing that the past could no longer be ignored, that the truth was too great to be hidden any longer. By the end of the evening, there were no grand reconciliations, no tearful moments of understanding. But there was a small shift, a quiet recognition that, despite the pain, they could still share this moment together. For Anna, that was enough. She didn't need perfection, she needed honesty. And they were finally on the path toward it. As time passed, Anna began to embrace the changes that were happening in her life. She had accepted the job offer from James, not because it was handed to her on a silver platter, but because it represented something more, an opportunity to step into a new world where she could make her own way. It wasn't easy. The first few weeks at the company were a blur of meetings, paperwork, and trying to find her footing in a world that was so far removed from the small town she'd come from. But as the days went on, Anna realized she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She had the skills, the drive, and now she had the resources to make things happen. James had taken her under his wing, not just as an employee, but as someone he saw potential in. At first, their interactions were formal, professional. He gave her assignments that challenged her, pushed her limits, and slowly, she began to prove herself. James never treated her with any special favor, but he recognized her intelligence, her determination, and her ability to take charge when needed. As the weeks went by, Anna grew more confident, more at ease in her new role. Her mother, though still cautious and protective, was beginning to see the positive changes in Anna. The two of them talked more often, and there was a softening in her mother's approach. It wasn't perfect. There were still days of silence, of hesitation, but it was progress. Anna was no longer the scared girl from the small town, clinging to her mother's apron strings. She was a woman finding her own way, learning to balance her past with her future. And then there was James. The man who had once seemed so distant, so impossible to relate to, was now a part of her life in a way that Anna hadn't anticipated. They shared occasional lunches, brief conversations about the direction of the company, and sometimes late-night talks about their families and the choices they had made. James had always been a man of few words, but his support for Anna was clear. He respected her boundaries, never pushing her to accept more than she was willing to give. Slowly, they formed a relationship, one built on mutual respect but also, surprisingly, on something deeper. Anna wasn't sure what it was yet, whether it was the remnants of a lost father-daughter bond or something more complicated, but it was there, quietly growing in the background of their professional relationship. For Anna, this new chapter in her life was both exhilarating and daunting. She had the career she had dreamed of, but at the same time, she carried the weight of a past that refused to let go. Her mother's regrets, James's secrets, they were all part of the same story, the same tangled web of emotions that Anna was still learning to navigate. But she was no longer running from it. She was facing it step by step. And that was enough for now. A few months later, Anna found herself at a gravesite, standing beside her mother and James. The three of them had come together, not out of obligation, but out of a shared need for closure. It was a bright, crisp morning, and the air felt thick with the weight of the past. They had come to honor the woman who had been the catalyst for all of this, the woman who had brought them together, even after death. Evelyn's grave was simple, unadorned, but in its quietness, there was a certain peace. Anna knelt beside it, running her fingers over the cold stone, reading the name engraved there. Evelyn Harrison. She had never known the woman, never known the depths of her life with James, or the way she had shaped the course of everything that had happened since. But in this moment, Anna felt a connection, a bond between them, however tenuous it may have been. James stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his gaze distant. Her mother, though silent, was close, her presence a soft reassurance. Anna closed her eyes for a moment, taking in the cool breeze, the weight of the moment. She felt the quiet hum of something new beginning. It wasn't just the career, the job, or the family she was learning to accept. It was her own identity. She was learning who she was in relation to her past, her family, and her future. When she opened her eyes, she turned to James, her mother, and then to the horizon. There was so much still unknown, but for the first time in a long time, Anna felt ready to step forward. Her future was no longer a mystery. It was her own to shape.
A-hole stepfather got rid of all of my prized possessions as a child and beat the crap out of me regularly. I ended up getting all of his prized possessions and selling most of them, and when I told him, he tried to assault me in public, which resulted in criminal charges, losing his job, and his house. Now I get to see him all the time and rub his nose in it. So I was 15 when my mom decided to start dating this guy, Jason, from some sketchy dating site. I didn't like him from the moment I met him. Something about him just screamed fake. You know when you meet someone and they're just trying too hard? That was Jason. But, I figured it wouldn't last long, and whatever. I could just ignore him, right? Well, 2 months later, the guy moves in. Just like that. I didn't even have a say. My mom, Anna, didn't ask me if I was cool with it or if I had any feelings about it. Nope. One day, he was just there with his ugly plaid suitcase sitting in the living room like it owned the place. It was like he brought his bad energy with him. I tried to keep my head down and stay out of his way. Maybe he'd leave me alone if I wasn't a problem. Spoiler alert. That didn't work. About 3 weeks after he moved in, I came home from school to find that everything I cared about was gone. I'm talking about everything. My skateboards, my BMX bike, the half pipe I built myself, all my ice hockey gear. All of it. Gone. At first, I thought maybe they'd been stolen or something, but nope. Turns out Jason decided to take it all to the dump while I was at school. When I confronted him, he didn't even try to hide it. He just looked at me with this smug look and said, "I didn't want all your crap cluttering up my garage." Excuse me? His garage? The guy had been living with us for, what, like 5 minutes? And now everything was his? I was so angry I couldn't even talk. My mom just stood there. She didn't even back me up. I remember her saying, "Just let it go, honey. It's just stuff." Just stuff. Sure, I didn't need that skateboard or that BMX bike to survive, but it wasn't about the stuff. It was about the fact that Jason just came into my life, uninvited, and started throwing things away like I didn't matter. Anyway, I tried to suck it up. I told myself, okay, maybe that's the worst of it. Maybe this guy is just a neat freak or something. Boy, was I wrong. About 2 months after that, we were having dinner. It was some boring weeknight meal, nothing special. I got up to grab something from the fridge, and Jason snapped at me. "You didn't ask to be excused." I shrugged and said, "I didn't know I had to." Before I could even blink, the guy punches me square in the stomach. It wasn't some light slap or shove either. This was a full-on punch, like he was trying to knock the wind out of me. And it worked. I doubled over, gasping for air, completely stunned. I mean, what kind of grown man punches a 15-year-old? A total psycho, that's who. I looked over at my mom, thinking she'd say something, anything, but she just sat there. She didn't even flinch. She didn't even tell Jason to calm down. I was on my own. I could feel my whole world starting to collapse right there. My mom wasn't going to help me. She was too wrapped up in Jason to care about what he was doing to me. After that, things just got worse. It was like Jason had figured out he could do whatever he wanted, and I couldn't do a thing about it. He was obsessed with the idea that I was a lazy, worthless nerd. I had a solid collection of comics and Pokemon cards and a stack of fantasy and sci-fi books. I spent a lot of time reading and playing video games on my PS2. I guess that made me a target for him. One day, I came home to find that all of it was gone. My entire collection of comics and Pokemon cards? Gone. My PS2 and all the games? Gone. He'd tossed everything. I stormed into the kitchen ready to blow up at him, but before I could even get a word out, he gave me that same smug grin. Boys your age should be out playing football, not sitting around playing video games like some fey asterisk got nerd. I'll never forget how that made me feel. It wasn't even just about the stuff. It was about him taking away the things that made me, me. He was trying to erase who I was, and my mom, she let him. She even agreed with him half the time, saying I should be spending more time outside like normal kids. Normal. As if playing video games and reading comics made me less of a person. And the thing is, Jason wasn't some random unemployed loser. He was a middle school teacher. Yeah, he spent his days teaching kids and refereeing sports games in his free time, acting like he cared about them. But behind closed doors, he was this cruel, controlling asshole who made my life a living hell. The worst part was when he started controlling my money. My mom used to give me lunch money every week, so I could at least eat something during school. Jason decided I didn't deserve lunch money anymore because apparently I'd just spend it on gay shit like comics and video games. I was a kid. I needed to eat, and now I couldn't even afford a slice of pizza. So one day, I did what any starving 15-year-old would do. I took a few bucks from his stupid change jar. It wasn't even a lot, just enough for a slice of pizza and a soda. But of course, my twin sister Kelly, who loved causing drama, told Jason what I'd done. I thought he'd maybe yell at me, ground me or something, but nope. He called the cops. Jason actually called the police on me for taking like $3 out of his change jar. When they showed up, I was in total shock. I couldn't believe it. Jason pressed charges for larceny, over $3. The cops didn't even take it seriously, but Jason insisted. They took me down to the station, and when I came home, Jason was waiting. He didn't waste any time. The second I walked through the door, he beat the crap out of me. I remember lying in my room later that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking, is this it? Is this my life now? The next morning, I ran away. I didn't even have a plan. I just grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with some clothes, and took off. I couldn't stay in that house for one more second. But of course, the cops found me and brought me back. And the first thing Jason did, he started working on my mom, trying to convince her to send me away to some military school or boot camp. Anything to get me out of the house. By the time I turned 16, I had been in and out of juvie because of that larceny charge. I spent my 16th birthday behind bars, all because Jason was determined to ruin my life. Looking back, I don't even know how I survived it all. I was trapped, stuck in this house with a guy who hated me, and a mom who didn't care enough to stop him. I felt like I had no one in my corner. And the worst part was, I wasn't sure if it would ever end. All right. So after the whole mess with Jason taking my stuff and calling the cops over a few bucks, things didn't get better. In fact, they got way worse. Jason seemed to take some kind of sick joy in making my life hell. It was like he was constantly coming up with new ways to screw with me. And the worst part? My mom, Anna, let him. She didn't even try to stop it. She acted like it wasn't happening, or worse, like it was my fault for not just doing what Jason wanted. After the police incident, Jason stopped pretending to be the nice guy in front of my mom. I mean, he didn't hit me when she was around. He wasn't that dumb. But he made sure to show me exactly where I stood in the house. If I said anything he didn't like, he'd give me this look like, "You better watch it." And it wasn't just looks either. He started making these ridiculous rules, like I had to ask for permission to do anything. Get up from the table, use the bathroom, go to my room. If I didn't ask, there'd be consequences. One night, I was in my room, minding my own business, just trying to do my homework. It wasn't even that late, maybe like 9 p.m. Jason comes barging in without knocking, like he owned the place. He starts yelling at me about how I didn't do my chores that day. I explained I was working on a school project, and I'd get to them after. Apparently, that was the wrong answer. Next thing I know, he's dragging me out of my chair by the back of my shirt, yelling about how lazy I am. He slammed me into the wall so hard my shoulder cracked against it. The whole time he was telling me how I'd never amount to anything, how I was worthless. And again, where was my mom? In the living room, watching TV, acting like everything was totally fine. Afterward, when I told her what happened, she just said, "You really need to stop provoking Jason." Provoking? Right, like it was my fault he was a complete psycho. A couple weeks later, things escalated again. Jason had this thing where he hated seeing me enjoy anything. Like, if I was playing a game or reading a book, that was a problem for him. He wanted me to be working, cleaning, or doing whatever he thought was manly. So one Saturday, I was sitting in the living room playing a video game. Nothing crazy, just trying to relax. Jason comes storming in from outside, covered in sweat from working on his stupid woodworking project. He sees me, and I swear his face turns red. "Get up," he growls. I look up, confused. "What?" I said, "Get up, go mow the lawn, now!" It was literally 2 p.m., and it was over 90 degrees outside. I hadn't even finished the game I was playing. So I said, "I'll do it after dinner. It's too hot right now." Big mistake. Jason lunges at me, yanks the controller out of my hands, and throws it across the room. It hits the wall and shatters into pieces. Before I can even react, he grabs me by the collar and pulls me out of the chair. This time, he's not just angry, he's furious. "Do it now, or you'll be sorry," he hisses in my face. At this point, I knew better than to argue. I grabbed the mower and went outside, feeling the heat slam into me like a wall. I spent the next 2 hours mowing the lawn under the blazing sun, drenched in sweat. By the time I finished, I was so exhausted I could barely stand. Jason didn't care. He came outside, inspected my work, and then had the nerve to point out spots I missed. He made me go back and fix them, even though I could barely see straight. When I finally went back inside, my mom was at the kitchen table, reading a magazine. She looked up, saw me covered in sweat and dirt, and said, "You know, if you just did what Jason asked the first time, this wouldn't happen." That was the moment I realized something. My mom wasn't going to help me. She wasn't on my side. No matter what Jason did, she was always going to take his side. I was completely alone. The next few months were just one long nightmare. Jason kept finding new ways to make my life miserable. He'd barge into my room at random times, demanding I do chores or accusing me of slacking off. He threw out more of my stuff, including my favorite jacket that my grandma had given me before she passed. When I confronted him about it, he just shrugged and said, "It was ugly anyway." It wasn't just physical stuff he took, though. He took away any sense of safety I had in my own home. I was constantly on edge, always waiting for the next time he'd snap. I barely slept because I was afraid he'd come into my room in the middle of the night. I started flinching anytime someone raised their voice around me, even at school. Speaking of school, things weren't much better there. I used to be a decent student, nothing special, but I got by. But with everything going on at home, my grades started slipping. I couldn't concentrate on anything. I'd sit in class just staring at the clock, counting down the minutes until I had to go back home to Jason. My teachers noticed, but none of them ever asked me what was going on. And honestly, even if they had, I wouldn't have known what to say. What could I say? My stepdad's a psychopath and my mom doesn't care? Yeah, like that would help. The only person who seemed to get it was my best friend, Ryan. He knew something was up, but I never told him the whole story. I didn't want anyone to know how bad it really was. But he could tell. One day after school, he caught up with me and asked, Dude, are you okay? You haven't been yourself lately. I shrugged it off like I always did. Just dealing with some stuff at home, I said. Ryan gave me this look like he didn't believe me, but he didn't push it. Well, if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me. I nodded, but in my head I was thinking, what's the point? Talking won't change anything. Around this time, Jason's discipline got more public. He started tearing into me in front of my mom's friends, in front of the neighbors, anyone who would listen. He'd humiliate me, call me lazy and weak. One time, in front of a whole group of people, he told them I was never going to be a real man because I couldn't handle his tough love. Everyone just laughed. No one thought to ask if maybe, just maybe, Jason was going too far. My mom, of course, stood right next to him, nodding along like she agreed with every word. I think that's when I started to feel something shift in me. I was angry, so angry, but I didn't know what to do with that anger. It wasn't just about Jason anymore. It was about my mom, too. She let this happen. She let him do this to me. She wasn't just a bystander, she was part of the problem. And that realization, it made everything worse. But as much as I hated both of them, I felt trapped. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. I didn't even have money for lunch most days, let alone a way to escape. So I stayed. I stayed, and I survived. Barely. So, by the time I was 16, things were bad. Like, really bad. Jason wasn't even trying to pretend like he cared about me anymore. It was all about control, about breaking me down until there was nothing left. But the thing is, I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of knowing he had me beat, even if I was starting to feel like I couldn't take it anymore. One day, things hit a new low. It was a Friday afternoon, and I'd just gotten back from school. I was exhausted because Jason had kept me up half the night with his random chores. Seriously, he'd make me mop the kitchen floor at 2 a.m. just because he felt like it. Anyway, I get home, and the first thing I notice is that something's off. The whole house feels empty. It's hard to explain, but you know when you can just tell something is wrong? Yeah, that feeling. I go into the kitchen and Jason's there, sitting at the table with this weird smirk on his face. I hated that smirk. Every time he smiled like that, I knew it meant he was about to pull something messed up. My mom wasn't home, which wasn't that unusual, but still, it felt weird. Jason was just sitting there, tapping his fingers on the table, like he was waiting for something. Hey, Mike, he says, still smirking. Guess what I found in your room? Immediately my stomach dropped. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew it wasn't good. What are you talking about? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, don't play dumb with me, he says, standing up and walking toward me. He gets real close, too close, like he's trying to intimidate me. I found your stash. Now I was seriously confused. Stash? What stash? I didn't keep anything in my room besides my school stuff, and honestly, what was even left for him to take? He'd already thrown out everything I cared about. What stash? I ask, taking a step back, even though I didn't want to show him I was scared. Your drugs, he says, like it's the most obvious thing in the world. Found them hidden under your mattress. I stared at him, totally shocked. I don't do drugs, I said, completely baffled. I wasn't that kind of kid. I never even drank or smoked. But Jason? He was standing there, acting like he'd just busted me for some major crime. Don't lie to me, he shouts, his face turning red. He pulls out this little baggie from his pocket. It had some random pills in it. I had never seen them in my life. Where the hell did you get that? I asked, now more confused than anything. That's not mine. Jason just shakes his head, like he doesn't believe a word I'm saying. You've really done it this time, he says, pacing around the kitchen like he's working himself up. I'm calling your mom. We're sending you away. That's when it hit me. This was his plan. He was trying to frame me. He wanted me gone, and this was how he was going to do it. I couldn't believe it. I knew Jason hated me, but this was a new level of messed up. Before I could even think of how to respond, he picks up the phone and calls my mom. I stood there, completely helpless, while he told her he'd found drugs in my room and that I'd been hiding them for months. My mom, without even asking me if it was true, believed him. Of course, she did. I should have expected it, but it still hurt like hell to hear her say, "We need to do something about him, Jason. Maybe we should look into that military school you mentioned." Military school. This guy was literally framing me so he could ship me off to military school and get rid of me for good. I lost it. I mean, I absolutely snapped. I started yelling, telling him he was lying, that the pills weren't mine, that I wasn't going anywhere. But Jason didn't care. He just stood there, grinning like he'd won. And my mom? She just stayed on the phone, agreeing with him like she always did. I knew I had to get out of there. If I stayed, he was going to ruin my life. So I did what I thought was my only option. I ran away. Again. But this time, I wasn't just running because I needed space. I was running because I couldn't live in that house anymore. I couldn't take another minute of Jason's abuse, and I couldn't handle my mom's constant betrayal. She wasn't just standing by and letting it happen. She was helping him. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed it with whatever clothes I could find, and left. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anywhere to go. I just ran. I was on the streets for a couple of days, sleeping in the park and trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I thought about going to Ryan's house, but I didn't want to drag him into my mess. Plus, his parents were super strict, and I didn't want them to think I was a bad influence or anything. So I just wandered around, trying to stay out of sight and avoid anyone who might recognize me. But of course, I couldn't run forever. On the third day, the cops found me. They picked me up and took me straight back to Jason and my mom. When I walked in the door, Jason was sitting there with that same damn smirk on his face, like he was happy to see me get dragged back. He didn't even wait for the cops to leave before he started laying into me. "You think you can just run away and everything will be fine?" he sneered, pacing around me like a predator. "You're going to military school, Mike. There's no way out of this." I looked over at my mom, hoping she'd maybe, just this once, stand up for me. But no. She just stood there, arms crossed, nodding along with everything Jason said. She was completely on his side again. It was like I didn't even exist to her anymore. At that point, I'd had enough. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to cry. I just stared at them, this hollow feeling settling in my chest. I didn't say a word as Jason kept yelling, telling me how much of a failure I was, how I was never going to amount to anything. It was like I'd become numb to it all. But deep down, something was changing. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I wasn't going to let him control me. And I sure as hell wasn't going to military school. I just didn't know how to stop it yet. When the police left, Jason walked over to me, got right in my face, and whispered, "This is the end for you, Mike. I'll make sure of it." That was the moment I realized I had to fight back. I didn't know how, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going down without a fight. Not anymore. By the time I was 18, I'd finally gotten out of that house. After running away a couple more times, my mom and Jason decided military school wasn't worth the trouble. Maybe they didn't want to pay for it, or maybe they just got sick of dealing with me. Either way, I was done. I graduated high school, packed my bags, and left as soon as I could. I didn't care where I went, as long as it wasn't under Jason's roof. At first, I didn't look back. I didn't call my mom, didn't visit, didn't even drive through the neighborhood. I was done with both of them. For a couple of years, I focused on getting my life together. I got a job, started lifting weights, and made sure I never had to rely on anyone like Jason ever again. I guess you could say I got stronger, not just physically, but mentally too. I wasn't that scared kid anymore. Jason had no power over me, at least not like he used to. But here's the thing. The past doesn't just disappear. It sits there, waiting for you, whether you want to deal with it or not. And for me, it all came rushing back when I heard my mom was sick. It started with a random call from my aunt. We weren't super close, but she was the only family member who didn't totally buy into Jason's BS. She told me my mom had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, and she didn't have much time left. I didn't know how to feel about it. I mean, yeah, she was my mom, but after everything that had happened, part of me felt like she wasn't really my mom anymore. Jason had taken her away from me, turned her into someone I barely recognized. Still, I decided to visit. Not for her, really, but for me. I needed some kind of closure, even if I didn't know what that meant at the time. When I showed up at the house, it was like stepping into a time machine. Everything looked exactly the same. The worn-out couch, the old TV in the corner, the ugly curtains Jason had insisted on. The only thing that had changed was my mom. She looked small, frail, the kind of person who could barely stand, let alone fight back. I guess the cancer had taken its toll. Jason was there, of course, hovering over her like he was her protector or something. It made me sick just looking at him. But he didn't scare me anymore. He couldn't. I was bigger now, stronger, and I knew it. He couldn't intimidate me like he did when I was 15. My mom tried to talk, but it was mostly Jason doing the talking for her. He went on about how he'd been taking care of her, how hard it was, how much money it was costing. All I could think about was how fake it all sounded. I knew Jason didn't care about my mom. He cared about the money, about the house, about his stupid woodworking projects. He was the same manipulative jerk he'd always been. After a while, my mom pulled me aside. She was struggling to get the words out, but she told me something that surprised me. She said she was leaving Jason. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life with him, not after everything he'd done. I couldn't believe it. For years, she'd sided with him, let him control everything. But now, when she had barely any time left, she was finally standing up for herself. Turns out she had already seen a lawyer and had a separation agreement in place. Jason would get a set amount of money, and he'd have 45 days to pack his crap and leave the house. She even bought back his childhood home from the bank when he had to sell it to pay off his debts years ago. Now he'd be moving back in there. Good riddance, right? It didn't take long after that for my mom to pass away. I had mixed feelings, honestly. I was sad, sure, but there was this other part of me. This part that was just angry. Angry at her for not leaving Jason sooner. Angry at Jason for ruining so much of my childhood. And angry at myself for not doing more to stop it. But then, things started to get interesting. See, my mom had let Jason come back and get his stuff, but he was dragging his feet. He thought he could keep coming and going like he owned the place. But the separation agreement had a deadline, and he was past it. Legally, everything left in the house was mine now. So I did what any normal person would do. I sold it. All of it. Every last piece of Jason's precious junk. First up was his baseball card collection. I'd overheard him bragging about how much it was worth over the years, and I knew it would sell fast. I got about $14,000 for it. Next, I sold all his autographed sports memorabilia, around $11,000. I wasn't done yet, though. Jason was obsessed with woodworking, so I sold his equipment and a few pieces of furniture he'd made. That brought in another $6,500. But I kept some of the good stuff. He had this coin collection, and guess what? I also collect coins. I took the best pieces for myself, along with a few tools and some random odds and ends. Oh, and I also kept his mother's engagement ring, a platinum band with 3 diamonds. I figured it was worth a lot, but honestly, I kept it just because I knew it would piss him off. And man, did it piss him off. About a month later, I ran into Jason at the grocery store. He was loading his car when I walked up to him. I didn't even hesitate. I told him straight to his face that I'd sold all his stuff. His reaction? Exactly what I'd hoped for. He snapped. The guy couldn't control himself. He swung at me, but he wasn't the same Jason anymore. He was old, weak. I dodged his punches easily, and the ones that did connect barely even hurt. Meanwhile, I had my phone out, ready to call the cops. He kept swinging, kept yelling, kept losing it, even as I talked to the 911 operator. The best part? He started ramming his shopping cart into my car, thinking that would get me to back off. By the time the police showed up, he was red-faced, out of breath, and looking like an idiot. They arrested him right there in the parking lot. Assault, communicating threats, destruction of property, the works. And you know what the best part is? That wasn't the end of it. Jason lost his job at the middle school because of the charges. He lost his pension. The guy couldn't catch a break, and for once, I didn't feel bad about it. He ended up having to sell his mother's house just to pay for the expensive lawyer he'd hired, thinking he could somehow beat the charges. Spoiler alert, he didn't. So after Jason's little meltdown at the grocery store, you'd think he'd finally get the message that he couldn't mess with me anymore. But of course the guy was too stubborn, or maybe too stupid, to just let it go. I mean, he already lost everything. His job, his money, his house, but somehow he still thought he could win. That's the thing about people like Jason. They always think they're invincible, even when everything around them is falling apart. Anyway, after his arrest, word spread fast. My nephew Tyler, who was on the football team, made sure everyone at school knew that Jason had been arrested for assaulting me. It didn't take long for other parents to get wind of it, and a bunch of them started calling the school, demanding that Jason step down from his refereeing gigs. The dude was a middle school ref, for crying out loud, and now people knew he was a bully. No way he was going to keep that job. Turns out, he didn't even get the chance to step down. He was basically fired from that, too. No one wanted him near their kids anymore, not after what he did to me. I'll admit, it felt pretty damn good to see him lose everything he'd built up. It wasn't just about the money or the stuff. It was about the fact that he no longer had power over anyone, especially me. But it gets better. Remember how I told you Jason had to sell his mom's house to pay for the lawyer he couldn't afford? Well, apparently he didn't get nearly as much for the house as he thought he would. He ended up in this crappy little trailer park on the edge of town, living in a trailer that looked like it was about to fall apart at any second. And the best part? He had to take a job as a cashier at Walmart just to make ends meet. You can imagine how much I loved that. Here was the guy who used to act like he was better than me, who thought he was smarter, tougher, whatever. And now? Now he was ringing up people's groceries at Walmart, barely making enough to pay his rent. But I wasn't done. Not yet. The first time I went to Walmart after finding out where he worked, I purposely stood in line longer than I needed to. I waited until his line was free, even though there were open registers right next to him. I wanted him to see me, to know I wasn't just going to disappear from his life. The look on his face when I stepped up to the counter was priceless. He looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die. "Hey, Jason," I said, all casual, like nothing had ever happened between us. "How's it going?" He didn't say a word. He just started scanning my groceries, his hands shaking a little. I could see the rage building up behind his eyes, but he couldn't do anything about it. Not anymore. As he scanned the last item, I made a point of handing him exact change, real slow, like I was enjoying every second of it. "Oh, wait," I said, pulling a rare coin from my pocket, one that I'd taken from his coin collection. "Didn't realize I had this. Guess I'll use my credit card instead." The way his face twisted in anger, it was almost enough to make me laugh out loud. But I kept my cool. I didn't need to say much. Just being there, making him ring up my stuff, was enough. But that wasn't the last time I saw him. Every time I needed something from Walmart, I made sure to go to that same store, wait in that same line. Every time, I'd make some little comment that I knew would dig under his skin. Like the time I bought a brand new above-ground pool for my daughter. I knew Jason loved those ratcheting wrenches he used to have, so as he scanned the pool, I said, "You know, I just sold those wrenches you loved. Figured I'd use the money to buy this pool. My daughter's gonna love it." He didn't respond, but I could tell he was fuming. He was stuck there, working a dead-end job, while I was out there living my life, doing just fine. It was the ultimate karma, and I loved every second of it. And yeah, maybe it sounds petty, but after everything Jason had put me through, I didn't care. This guy had tried to ruin my life. He'd taken my stuff, beat me, humiliated me, and even tried to send me away. He'd called the cops on me, framed me for something I didn't do, and made my teenage years a living hell. He deserved every bit of misery he was getting now. But it wasn't just about revenge. It was about closure. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had control. Jason couldn't hurt me anymore. He couldn't take anything away from me. In fact, he was the one losing everything now, and I was the one who got to walk away, head held high. The final nail in the coffin came a few weeks later. My niece Emma, who went to the same middle school where Jason used to work, told me that he'd come back to the school to get his stuff after losing his job. Apparently, he made this huge scene in the middle of the hallway, yelling at the principal and crying about how unfair it all was. The kids who were there for summer school saw the whole thing. Emma said it was the most embarrassing thing she'd ever seen. I couldn't help but laugh when she told me. Jason had spent his entire life trying to be the big man, the one in control, and now he was nothing. Just some washed-up guy who couldn't even hold it together in front of a bunch of middle schoolers. After that, I didn't see much of Jason. I still went to Walmart from time to time, but I didn't need to rub it in anymore. I'd gotten what I wanted. Jason's life was ruined, and mine was just beginning, cut out of the will by mom and stepdad. 'Cause I'm not family, but now that I've inherited $3 million, suddenly they want me back. So let's start from the beginning. When I was 14, my life took a sharp turn. My mom decided it was time to settle down again, this time with a man who already had a son from his previous marriage. He was 17, 3 years older than me, and let's just say we didn't exactly hit it off from the start. The ink wasn't even dry on their marriage certificate when tensions started to brew. At first, it was the small stuff. You know, the kind of petty arguments you'd expect when you throw strangers into a house and tell them they're family now. He'd leave his dirty dishes in the sink like they'd magically clean themselves, and I'd be the one getting an earful about the mess in the kitchen. Or I'd find my shampoo mysteriously vanishing faster than usual, only to see my new stepbrother sporting what looked suspiciously like my favorite hair product. It wasn't just the stepbrother antics that got to me, it was how my stepdad handled things. He had this way of just assuming I was the root of all problems. If something was out of place, somehow it was my doing. And Mom? She wasn't much help either. She was so caught up in trying to make this new family work that she'd overlook the obvious, always smoothing things over, making excuses for why my stepbrother could do no wrong. A year into this new family setup, Mom and stepdad had news they were expecting. That's when the dynamic really shifted. Suddenly, it was all about preparing for the new baby. The house needed redecorating, and guess whose room was conveniently chosen for the nursery? Yep, mine. So, I got shuffled to the smaller guest room, which barely had space for my stuff. It felt like a demotion, a clear message about where I stood in this family hierarchy. As my new half-brother grew up, it became apparent that he was the golden child. My stepbrother, already spoiled, seemed to take cues from this and upped his entitled behavior, knowing he could get away with anything. He dropped out of college and came back home bringing a whirlwind of trouble with him, from late-night parties to dodgy friends coming and going at all hours. Complaints? Met with a shrug from stepdad and sorrowful looks from mom, as if to say, "What can we do?" I started spending more time at friends' houses, anywhere I could feel a bit normal. School became my escape. I joined clubs, stayed late for extra classes, anything to avoid going home before I absolutely had to. This wasn't just teenage rebellion, it was survival. The atmosphere at home was suffocating, like constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next blow-up. One particular evening stands out in my memory. I had come home later than usual after a school project. The house was quiet, too quiet, which was unusual. I found a note on the fridge saying they'd gone out for dinner. A family dinner I wasn't told about. It was a simple message, but it hit me hard. It was as if they'd forgotten I existed unless I was there to be blamed for something. The breaking point came not long after my 18th birthday. I'd saved up some money from a part-time job, a job I got despite stepdad's complaints about how it would affect my studies, which was just another way of saying he didn't like not having me around to pin things on. I came home one day to find my room turned upside down. Stepbrother had thrown a party while the parents were out, and somehow my room became the casualty. Beer stains on my project papers, a broken lamp, and my privacy completely violated. I confronted them all at breakfast the next day. Stepdad's response? Cold and dismissive, saying I should have been more responsible with my belongings. Mom just sighed and mentioned something about family sticking together and letting things go. But I was done letting things go. During those teenage years, it seemed like everything I did was under a microscope, but not in the caring, let's help you grow kind of way. More like, let's catch you doing something wrong. My stepbrother, who had become pretty much a professional couch potato, was somehow always off the hook. My little half-brother was just a kid, sure, but the amount of coddling he got made it clear who the favorites were. I remember working on a big science project that I was really excited about. I needed quiet and space, both of which were in short supply at home. I tried to set up a little workspace in the corner of the living room, but it was like I had set up in the middle of Times Square. My stepbrother would blast his music, my little brother would be running around screaming, and there was my stepdad, always finding some reason to tell me to move my stuff. "You're taking up too much space," he'd say, or "Your project is making a mess." It was frustrating. I felt like I was trying to build something delicate in the middle of a tornado. One day, I'd had enough. I packed up my project and marched over to a friend's house. Her parents were always welcoming, and they let me spread out my work in their quiet dining room. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I could think straight. That's when it hit me how abnormal my home life had become. My friend noticed my relief at just being able to work in peace. "You're always welcome here," she said one day, seeing the stress melt off me the minute I stepped into her house. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to me. It also made me realize that this wasn't how it was supposed to be. Home should be your safe place, not somewhere you escape from. I started picking up more shifts at my part-time job. If I wasn't at school or at a friend's place, I was working. Not just for the money, but because each hour away from home was a little easier to breathe. My stepdad didn't like it, always ranting about how a job was distracting me from schoolwork. But I knew the real reason he didn't like it. I wasn't around as much for him to find fault with. As I saved up, the plan to move out started forming more solidly in my mind. I knew it wasn't going to be easy. There was no way my mom and stepdad would take it well. But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the only way I could get some control over my life. Then came the day I finally told them. I'd found a small apartment not too far from college, and it was affordable on my budget. I sat them down, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm moving out," I announced. The room went quiet. Too quiet. You could cut the tension with a knife. My stepdad was the first to react. "You think you're ready to live on your own, at your age?" he scoffed. My mom just sat there, looking between us, her face unreadable. "I am," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I need my own space. I've saved up enough to manage." The argument that followed was brutal. Accusations were thrown about how ungrateful I was, how I was just trying to get away from my responsibilities at home. My stepdad even tried to guilt me about leaving my little brother behind. "He looks up to you, he said, as if that was enough reason for me to stay in a situation that was making me miserable. But I stood my ground. This wasn't just about wanting my own space, it was about needing it for my mental and emotional health. I packed my things over the next few days, each item I put into a box feeling like a tiny piece of the fortress I was building around myself. The day I moved out, my mom came to my room. I was expecting another argument, but instead she helped me pack. We didn't talk much, but when we did, it was superficial. Do you need more boxes? Or, I can give you some of the old kitchen stuff. It was like if we stayed on safe topics, we could avoid the massive elephant in the room. When I finally closed the door to my new apartment after moving everything in, I felt a wave of so many emotions: relief, sadness, excitement, fear. I was on my own now, truly on my own. It was terrifying, but it was also freeing. Those first few nights were the hardest. The apartment felt too quiet, too empty. I missed even the annoying noises of my family home. Well, sort of. But as days turned into weeks, I started to appreciate the peace. I could come and go as I pleased, eat when I wanted, sleep without being disturbed. It was like discovering a new part of myself that I had kept muted for so long. Life away from home settled into a routine pretty quickly, and honestly, it was the most peace I'd had in years. My relationship with my mom and stepdad wasn't great, but it was manageable since I wasn't under their roof 24/7. I was doing my own thing, staying busy with work and college and keeping my head down. Then, out of nowhere, my stepdad had a health scare that shook everything up. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious enough for him to start thinking about the future, specifically his will. I heard about it through my mom, who called one evening sounding a bit more somber than usual. "Your stepdad's been thinking about his will," she said, as casually as one might talk about the weather. "He wants to make sure everything is in order." "Okay," I replied, unsure where this was going. The tone in her voice hinted it wasn't just a courtesy call to keep me in the loop. She hesitated, then continued. "He's decided to include your stepbrother and your half-brother, but not you. He feels it makes more sense since they're his biological kids." There it was. The sting. Not that I was expecting anything, but hearing it laid out so bluntly was a gut punch. It wasn't the money or the potential inheritance that hurt. It was the clear message that I was an outsider in the family I'd spent over 5 years trying to fit into. "I see," I managed, keeping my voice neutral. "Thanks for letting me know." Mom must have sensed my hurt because she quickly added, "It's just legal stuff, you know? Doesn't change how we feel about you." "Right," I said, not really believing her. The conversation awkwardly drifted to other topics before ending, but the damage was done. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling that familiar ache of not belonging. The weeks that followed were tough. I mulled over the conversation again and again. Part of me wanted to confront my stepdad, demand an explanation, or at least tell him how much he'd hurt me. But another part of me wondered why I even cared. I hadn't felt like a part of their family for years. Why was this any different? I decided to pull back, limit my visits even more. It was a defense mechanism, I guess, protecting myself from being hurt further by people who had already shown they didn't consider me family when it really counted. Then, the actual wake-up call came. It wasn't a dramatic event. No yelling matches or tearful showdowns. It was quieter than that, more profound. I was at a coffee shop, working on a term paper, when I overheard a group at the next table. They were laughing, sharing stories about their families, the usual ups and downs, normal stuff. And it hit me. I didn't have that. I hadn't had it for a long time, if ever. That realization sparked something in me. I started to question why I was allowing myself to be upset over being excluded from a will when I had already been excluded from the family in every way that mattered. It wasn't about the money. It was about wanting to feel valued and loved by the people who were supposed to be my family. From then on, I made a conscious decision to focus on the relationships in my life that did make me feel valued. Friends who had become like family, professors who mentored me, colleagues who respected me. I invested more in those connections, and gradually the hurt from my stepdad's will and the feeling of exclusion from my family began to fade. It wasn't an overnight change. There were still moments of bitterness, especially during family gatherings when I'd see my stepbrother and half-brother getting all the attention. But I was learning to accept that some things were out of my control, and where I could, I was building my own sense of family and belonging. The real test came when my stepdad's health scare passed, and life returned to normal for them. I was invited over for a family dinner, a celebration of sorts that he was doing better. I went, more out of a sense of obligation than anything else. The dinner was as awkward as I expected. My stepdad talked about his recovery. Everyone cooed over my half-brother's latest school achievements, and my stepbrother bragged about a new job. I sat there, mostly quiet, and it was clear I was the odd one out. But this time, it didn't hurt as much. I had reached a place of peace with my role in this family. I was the outsider, and that was okay because outside that house, I had people who cared about me for me, not for what I could bring to a will or a family name. After dinner, I left early, making some excuse about an early morning. As I drove home, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was okay, really okay, for the first time in years. I had faced the reality of my situation, dealt with the emotional fallout, and come out the other side stronger and more self-assured. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that life has a funny way of throwing you surprises when you least expect it. After getting comfortable in my own routine and accepting the limited, if not strained, relationship with my family, I got a call one afternoon that turned everything on its head. The call was from a lawyer, someone I'd never heard of before, who introduced himself in a formal, almost apologetic tone. He asked if I had a few minutes to discuss the estate of my grand aunt, my dad's mother's sister. Honestly, I barely remembered her. She was one of those relatives you hear about in stories from your parents, but don't really know. She had no children of her own, and I remembered her being mentioned as someone who helped raise my dad. "I'm calling to inform you that your grand aunt passed away recently," the lawyer continued, his voice a mixture of professional and sympathetic. "And she left her entire estate to you." To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I felt a mix of emotions: sadness for her passing, confusion about why she chose me, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility about what was coming next. The lawyer explained that my grand aunt had been quite well off, having invested wisely over her lifetime. She left behind a sizable estate, including a trust fund that was now mine, totaling around $3 million. Just like that, my financial situation changed overnight. After the call, I sat there, phone in hand, trying to process the news. Why me? We weren't close. I visited her a few times, sure, but those visits were more about checking in on an elderly relative than bonding. She must have seen something in me, maybe a reflection of her own independence, or perhaps it was her way of reaching back to family one last time. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings with the lawyer, signing documents, and learning exactly what I had inherited. It wasn't just money. There were properties, stocks, and a few personal items that had sentimental value. Among them was a letter she had written, explaining her decision. She admired my independence and determination, something she said reminded her of herself at my age. Equipped with this new wealth, I made some immediate changes. I bought a house, something I never thought I'd be able to afford on my own so soon. It was a modest place, but it was mine, and it represented a new chapter in my life. I also invested in a rental property, thinking ahead about long-term financial security. The rest of the money I put into savings and investments, consulting with a financial advisor to make sure I was making smart choices. But with great wealth comes great responsibility, and as I soon found out, great drama. I hadn't told anyone in my family about the inheritance, wanting to avoid any potential fallout. However, secrets have a way of coming out, and this one was no different. It started with my cousin, who somehow got wind of the inheritance through mutual connections in the legal world. Before I knew it, my mom knew, and once she knew, it wasn't long before everyone else did too. Phone calls started coming in, not just from her, but from my stepdad, my stepbrother, and even relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone seemed to have a reason why they needed a piece of my inheritance. "Times are tough," they'd say, or, "You know how bad his health has been," referring to my stepdad. It was as if they all suddenly remembered I existed, but only as a bank. I was bombarded with requests for loans, gifts, and outright demands for money. It felt like I was watching vultures circling, each waiting for their chance to swoop in. The pressure was immense, and for a moment I faltered, wondering if I was being selfish by holding on to the inheritance. But then I remembered the years of feeling like an outsider in my own family. The years of scrimping and saving, working hard for every dime and getting myself through college without their help. This was my chance to secure my future, and I wasn't going to let guilt or manipulation sway me. When my mom asked directly why I hadn't thought to share the news with her, I had enough. I explained calmly but firmly that the distance between us wasn't just physical, but emotional. Her decisions, and by extension those of my stepdad and stepbrother, had shown me where I stood with them. The inheritance was a chance for me to do things on my terms, without relying on anyone else. "It's my life," I told her, "and I need to live it my way. I'm sorry if that hurts you, but I have to do what's best for me now." The fallout from that conversation was as expected. Accusations of being ungrateful and selfish were thrown my way, but I held my ground. Over time, the calls became less frequent, and the requests for money dried up as they realized I wasn't budging. It was a tough lesson in who my real family was. It wasn't defined by blood or marriage, but by the people who supported me without expecting anything in return. Those were the relationships I valued and continued to nurture. As for the inheritance, it remained a bittersweet reminder of my grand aunt, a woman I wish I had known better. Her final gift was not just the wealth she left me, but the clarity and conviction to stand up for myself, no matter the cost. The inheritance was supposed to be a blessing, a windfall from a distant relative who thought I might do something good with it. But as soon as word got out that I was suddenly a few million richer, it felt more like I'd painted a target on my back rather than received a gift. After I made it clear to my mom and the rest of the family that I wasn't going to hand out cash just because we shared some DNA, things got chilly. Fast. The phone calls and texts that were initially filled with thinly veiled hints for money turned into outright pleas, and then into angry demands when I held firm on my decision to keep my finances private. It wasn't just the immediate family either. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly very interested in reconnecting. I received messages like, "Hey, just heard about Aunt so-and-so, so sorry to hear she passed, but also could you help me with some money? Times are tough." It was like they all had the same script, only the names were changed. One of the toughest calls was from my stepdad. He'd never been warm, but now he was cold and calculating. "You know, we've always considered you part of this family. It's only right you think of your brothers in this difficult time," he said one day, his voice dripping with a guilt-trip glaze. "My brothers haven't considered me family unless they needed something," I shot back, surprising even myself with the sharpness of my tone. "That's a harsh way to put it," he retorted, but I could tell he was taken aback. I had never spoken to him like that before. I had always been the compliant stepchild, the one who didn't rock the boat too much. The conversation spiraled from there, with him accusing me of being selfish and me reminding him of all the times I'd felt excluded and unimportant in his family. By the end, we were both too angry to see any reason, and the call ended with a mutual understanding that things between us would never be the same. The final straw came when my mom tried to mediate, which really meant taking my stepdad's side and trying to convince me to share my inheritance. "It's what families do," she insisted during one particularly tense visit where she'd shown up unannounced at my new house. "Families also support each other," I countered, feeling both exhausted and exasperated. "When have you ever supported me like this, emotionally or financially?" She was silent, unable to answer. The truth was, our relationship had been superficial at best for years. This money had just brought all the underlying issues to the surface. After she left, the calls and messages slowed, then stopped. It seemed they had finally accepted that I wasn't going to cave. It was a relief, but also a profound disappointment. It hurt to know that my value to them was tied so closely to what I could provide financially. In the wake of the family fallout, I began to invest more time in my relationships with friends and colleagues, people who appreciated me for who I was, not for my bank account. I also started volunteering, something I'd always wanted to do, but never had the resources or time for before. Giving back on my own terms was healing in a way I hadn't expected. It helped me connect with people, build new friendships, and fill the void left by my family's conditional affection. I also saw a therapist who helped me work through the feelings of betrayal and abandonment that had resurfaced with this whole ordeal. It was tough, unpacking years of emotional baggage, but it was necessary. I learned to set boundaries, to recognize the signs of manipulative behavior, and most importantly, to value my own needs and well-being. One day, I decided to write a letter to each family member who had tried to pressure me for money. In each letter, I explained my feelings, why I had made the decisions I did, and how their actions had affected me. It was more for my closure than anything. I didn't expect any responses. To my surprise, my half-brother replied. He was young, only 14, and his letter was clumsy, but sincere. "I'm sorry for asking for money. I miss you," he wrote. It was a small step, but a meaningful one. We started texting, small conversations about school and his hobbies. It wasn't much, but it was something, a possible bridge to rebuilding at least one family connection. Update 1. Hey everyone, just wanted to update you all on what's been going on since I last posted. It's been a few weeks, and honestly, I wish I could say things have gotten better, but they've actually gone from bad to much worse. I appreciate all the support and advice you guys have given me. It's been a lifeline during this crazy time. So, after everything blew up with my family, my mom reached out to me in August wanting to talk. Given everything that's happened, I had a pretty strong hunch that this wasn't going to be a simple catch-up. To keep things somewhat neutral, we decided to meet at a public place. I figured that might keep the drama to a minimum, or at least keep things from getting too crazy. The meetup was awkward from the get-go. My mom kicked things off by talking about how they've been struggling financially. She mentioned my half-brother's private school fees have become a burden since my stepdad got sick and had his work hours cut. Then she shifted to talking about how they've been wanting to renovate the house and how she desperately needs a vacation to get away from the mental toll of everything. Throughout all this, she didn't ask a single question about my life or how I've been coping. It was like I was just there to listen to her list of problems. I was getting more and more uncomfortable as the conversation dragged on, feeling like I was just a spectator to her woes. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and asked her to just get to the point. Without missing a beat, she said she expected me to write her a check for $1 million. Yes, you read that right. $1 million. She claimed that, technically, it should all be her money since it came from her late husband's inheritance. But she was being generous by only asking for a third. Her demands were growing more and more outlandish, and I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I quickly paid the bill and got out of there as fast as I could. Since that day, my mom has been going around calling me a thief, loudly proclaiming to anyone who will listen that the inheritance should have been hers in the first place. Meanwhile, my stepdad sent me a massive wall of text, lecturing me about how I can't just think of myself when I'm part of a bigger family, and that my decisions should be inclusive of everyone else. I reminded him pointedly how he didn't include me in his will because I wasn't family enough. That seemed to shut him up temporarily, but I doubt it's the end of it. Things have spiraled into absolute madness since then. Both my mom and stepdad have been bad-mouthing me all over the place, and I'm honestly a bit scared about what they might do next. It feels like they're trying to turn everyone against me, painting me as the bad guy in a situation they've blown way out of proportion. I'm trying to stay strong and keep a level head. But it's tough when it feels like the people who are supposed to support you are out to make your life harder. I'll keep you all updated if anything changes. But right now, it's just one big mess. Thanks again for all your support and advice. It really helps to know there are people out there who understand and care. Update 2. Hey everyone, dropping in again for a big update. Trust me, it's been a whirlwind these past few weeks, and honestly, I'm just trying to keep my head above water with all the crazy stuff that's been happening. I really appreciate all the support and advice you all have been throwing my way. It's been a huge help in navigating this chaos, so thank you a ton. So, here's the scoop. A few weeks back, out of nowhere, I get this super official-looking letter in the mail. It's from some lawyer I've never heard of, claiming that my mom is suing me for a huge chunk of my inheritance. Yeah, you heard that right. My own mom, suing me. My initial reaction? Full-blown panic. I mean, who wouldn't freak out? My mind was racing, thinking about all the legal battles I'd have to face. But then, just when I thought it couldn't get any more soap opera-worthy, my stepdad sends me this ominous text. He's all like, "You'll regret not sharing your money because now we're going to take you for everything you're worth." It was like something out of a bad movie, the villainous step-parent twisting the knife. Seriously, the audacity had my jaw on the floor. Rattled, but not beaten, I sent everything over to my attorney, expecting a whole ordeal. But get this, my attorney literally laughed when he read the letter. Not just a chuckle, but a full-on, "Are you kidding me?" kind of laugh. He tossed the letter into the trash and told me not to lose any sleep over it. According to him, my grandaunt's will is locked down tighter than Fort Knox. There's no way my mom can touch anything legally because she isn't even a descendant, and the will spells out the beneficiaries clear as day. But because my attorney is the thorough kind of guy he is, he didn't stop there. He dug a bit deeper into this so-called lawyer who sent the letter. Turns out, the office address listed is some rundown building that looks like it hasn't seen a tenant in years, and the phone number? Disconnected. No longer in service. Looks like my parents got desperate and decided to hire some fly-by-night, probably not even legit lawyer in a last-ditch effort to scare me into coughing up some cash. Realizing they were just trying to bluff me into surrendering part of my inheritance was both a relief and a wake-up call. They actually thought they could strong-arm me with some half-baked legal threat. The nerve, right? Knowing this, I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders. I mean, I was gearing up for a legal showdown. But now? I'm just shaking my head at the lengths they'd go to. So with that drama sort of deflated, I decided I needed a break from all the madness. I've been on edge, losing sleep, and just generally stressed out. I talked it over with my buddies, and we all agreed. It's time for a little getaway. So I'm taking some time off work to go traveling with my friends next week. Nothing fancy, just a road trip to some places we've always talked about visiting but never got around to. I think a change of scenery is exactly what I need to clear my head and recharge. It's weird, though, thinking about how things have unfolded. I used to look up to my mom and stepdad, you know? And now, seeing how they've acted, it's disappointing. But I'm learning that sometimes you have to step back from the people who are supposed to support you when they start pulling you down instead. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to this trip. A bit of adventure, some good laughs, and quality time with friends. Just what the doctor ordered to get away from the family drama. I'll keep you all posted on how it goes, and if anything else pops up on the home front. But for now, I'm focusing on the positive, on moving forward and not letting this whole mess drag me down anymore. Thanks again for all the support and advice. This community has been my rock through this storm, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate every comment, every message of encouragement. You guys are the best. Here's to better days ahead, right? Catch you all after my trip, hopefully with some fun stories and zero drama. Ex, who left me for my little sis, wants me back. Turns out she's cheating on him. So, yeah, I guess you could say my life was a bit of a mess from the start. I didn't have that perfect family everyone dreams of. My dad, Benny, wasn't really around much. He used to fight with my mom constantly, and then he'd just disappear for months. Sometimes, I didn't even know if he was alive. But honestly, I kinda got used to it. It was what it was, you know? I was maybe like 8 or 9 when I realized he wasn't coming back for good. He died when my sister Lisa was born, which just made my mom baby her even more. I don't mean my mom neglected me or anything like that. She did her best. I had food, a roof over my head, clothes to wear, but emotionally, I always felt like something was missing. My mom gave all her attention to Lisa. Every little thing she did was amazing, and it felt like I was just there. But, whatever. I didn't let it get to me too much. I was used to feeling second best. That all changed when I met Mark. I was celebrating my 18th birthday with a couple of friends at this restaurant downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small spot we'd go to every now and then. That's when I saw him. Mark. He was 40, older than me by quite a bit, but he didn't look it. He was charming, mature, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room. I was just this awkward teen, but he made me feel important. Looking back now, it's pretty embarrassing how quickly I fell for it. He'd always compliment me, buy me little gifts, and take me on long drives. I felt like I mattered for once, like someone finally saw me. I thought he was everything I'd been missing. We started dating, and honestly, things moved fast. Too fast, probably. But at that time, I didn't care. I was just happy to be with someone who made me feel loved. 4 years later, we got married. I was 22 and ready to start a family. I really wanted kids, but Mark had different ideas. He kept saying we should wait, that we needed to be more stable financially. He encouraged me to go back to school, even helped me get into a master's program. At first, I thought he was being supportive, like he wanted me to succeed. But now I'm not so sure. Maybe he just wanted me distracted. Anyway, I did the whole school thing, but deep down, I still wanted to be a mom. We talked about it off and on, but there was always an excuse: money, work, timing. I thought he was just being practical, you know? But I'd soon find out he had other reasons for stalling. About 5 years into our marriage, I noticed things started to change. Mark was still sweet, but there was this distance. He wasn't around as much. He'd go on these business trips for days at a time. At first, I didn't question it. I trusted him, or at least I thought I did. But then, there were small things that didn't add up, little lies here and there. One day he'd say he was in Boston, but then I'd find out he was still in town. I ignored it because, honestly, I didn't want to believe what was going on. But it all came crashing down when I found out the truth. One night, he told me he had to leave for a work trip again, this time for a whole week. I didn't think much of it, but something in my gut told me to check. I don't know why. I didn't normally do stuff like that, but this time, I just had a feeling. So I looked up his credit card transactions. I know, kind of snoopy, but at that point, I needed to know. There it was. He hadn't left town. In fact, he booked a hotel room just a few miles away from where we lived. I felt like I got punched in the gut. My hands were shaking and I couldn't think straight. I drove down to that hotel, hoping, praying that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't what I thought. Maybe there was some explanation, something innocent. But when I got there, I saw his car parked outside. I went inside, marched straight to the front desk, and told them I was his wife. The lady behind the counter gave me a look like she knew exactly what was going on, but didn't want to say anything. She told me his room number, and I went up, heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I stood outside the door for what felt like forever, trying to decide if I even wanted to go through with it. When I finally knocked, Lisa opened the door. I can't even explain what that felt like. It was like everything around me just disappeared. My own sister. The one person I trusted more than anyone else in the world. I'd always been there for her, always took care of her when our mom was too busy spoiling her. And now she was sleeping with my husband. Mark was sitting on the bed behind her, looking at me like I was the intruder. I didn't even know what to say. I just stood there, staring at them, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. I asked him how long it had been going on. He didn't even try to lie. 6 months. For 6 months, the man I was married to and the sister I thought loved me were sneaking around behind my back. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to scream, to hit him, to do something, but all I could do was stand there in shock. I finally asked him why. Why would he do this to me? And you know what he said? He said he didn't love me anymore, that I wasn't the same girl he fell in love with, that I wasn't giving him enough attention. Can you believe that? He had the audacity to make it my fault. I don't even know where to start with what happened next. Honestly, after everything blew up, it felt like I was stuck in some twisted reality. Everything that I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, all of it was shattered. And I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces, even though I didn't really know how to do that. Mark and I had this massive fight after I found out about him and Lisa. And when I say massive, I mean it was ugly. There was yelling, crying, and accusations being thrown all over the place. He tried to defend himself at first, saying things like, "It just happened," and "I didn't mean to hurt you," which is total bull because how do you accidentally sleep with someone for 6 months? That's not a mistake, that's a choice. But the worst part was when he started blaming me for it, saying I wasn't paying enough attention to him. Like, what? That's his excuse for betraying me? He basically said that because I was too focused on my career and not on him, he had no choice but to find someone else to give him attention. It was such a slap in the face. I mean, I worked my butt off to get my master's degree because he told me that's what we should do. Focus on our future, make sure we're stable before having kids. But now he was turning that around on me, making it seem like I was the bad guy for doing what he wanted in the first place. So, we had that fight, and I told him I wanted a divorce. He didn't even try to fight it. He just shrugged and said, "If that's what you want." Like it didn't matter at all. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised by his reaction, but it still hurt. After everything we'd been through, I thought he'd at least try to fix things. But no, he just gave up on us, on me, like it was no big deal. I didn't know what to do next. My whole world was falling apart, and I was just numb. I wasn't sure where to go or who to turn to. My mom wasn't any help. She made it clear that she was siding with Lisa, telling me that I should forgive and forget because family is family. Yeah, no thanks. I didn't want to hear that. I didn't want anything to do with either of them at that point. Then, as if things couldn't get worse, I found out I was pregnant. I didn't even know how to process that. I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that my husband had been cheating on me with my sister, and now I was pregnant? It felt like some sick joke. Part of me thought maybe the baby could change things. Maybe Mark would realize how badly he'd messed up, but deep down I knew it wouldn't fix anything. The stress from everything was unbearable. I tried to focus on taking care of myself, but it didn't matter. I lost the baby. I was completely crushed. That was supposed to be the one good thing in all this mess, and it was ripped away from me too. And where was Mark when this happened? Off with Lisa, of course. He didn't even come to the hospital to check on me. I was all alone, dealing with the worst pain I'd ever felt, both physically and emotionally, and he couldn't even bother to show up. After that, I knew I couldn't stay. There was nothing left for me here. The person I thought I'd spend my life with had betrayed me in the worst way possible, and my own family had turned their backs on me. I had to get out. That's when Karen stepped in, my best friend, my ride or die. She was moving to another state and asked if I wanted to come with her. I didn't even hesitate. I was already divorced at that point, and there was nothing keeping me in that town anymore. I packed up what little I had left, signed the final divorce papers, and left. Starting over was harder than I thought. Moving to a new state was supposed to be a fresh start, but the first few months were brutal. I didn't know anyone except Karen, and I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that had been weighing me down. I didn't trust anyone. I barely even trusted myself. I was constantly looking over my shoulder, half expecting Mark or Lisa to pop up and ruin my life even more. I know it sounds paranoid, but after everything that happened, I was scared. Karen did her best to help me get settled, though. She's the kind of friend who never gives up on you, no matter how many times you fall apart. She dragged me out of the house when I didn't want to go anywhere, forced me to meet new people, and slowly but surely, I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, I could have a life again. It wasn't easy, though. Trusting people again was probably the hardest part. I'd be talking to someone, trying to make new friends. But in the back of my mind, I'd always be wondering, what's their angle? Are they going to stab me in the back like everyone else did? It's exhausting living like that. But after being hurt so badly, it's like you can't help it. You're always on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. And then, just when I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again, I met Eric. It wasn't love at first sight or anything like that. To be honest, I didn't even want to date at first. I had this wall up, and I wasn't about to let anyone tear it down. But Eric was different. He didn't push. He didn't try to force his way into my life. He just waited. He'd show up with coffee when I was having a bad day, sit with me when I didn't feel like talking, and he never made me feel like I had to pretend to be okay when I wasn't. He let me heal on my own time, and that meant more to me than anything else. We took things slow, which was exactly what I needed. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. He made me feel safe, like I didn't have to keep my guard up 24/7. It wasn't long before I realized that what we had was something real, something that could last. About a year after I moved to the new state, Eric and I got married. It wasn't a big wedding or anything fancy, but it was perfect for us. His family welcomed me with open arms, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real family. A family that actually cared about me. And now, we're expecting our first child, and I couldn't be happier. Update 1. So, there I was, finally feeling like my life was on track. I had a great husband, a baby on the way, and for once, I felt happy. I was starting to believe that maybe I could leave the past behind. But life doesn't always work like that, right? Just when things were going smoothly, I got that email from Mark. To be honest, I didn't even want to open it. The second I saw his name pop up in my inbox, my stomach dropped. It had been 6 years since we split, and I hadn't heard a single word from him. I figured he was living his life with Lisa and whatever mess they'd made for themselves. I didn't care. But curiosity got the best of me, and I opened the email. Mark wrote like nothing had happened between us, like we hadn't gone through the messiest breakup of my life. He started by saying he missed me, that he'd been thinking about me a lot lately. I rolled my eyes so hard I swear I almost saw my brain. I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. He said he'd tried to find me but hadn't had any luck, probably because I made sure I disappeared from that whole town when I left. Then it got even weirder. He started talking about Lisa. Apparently things weren't going so great for them. He mentioned that she didn't care about him the way I did, that she didn't even bother celebrating his birthday. I had to laugh at that. Like, what did he expect? He thought she'd be the perfect replacement for me, and now he was complaining because she didn't bake him a cake or something? Give me a break. Mark went on to say that Lisa had been cheating on him, 5 times to be exact. The most recent one? With his own cousin Jack. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I mean, I didn't feel sorry for him, not one bit, but still. His cousin? That's messed up even by Lisa's standards. I couldn't help but laugh again. Like, did he really think this email was going to make me feel sorry for him after everything he put me through? He didn't stop there, though. He said he was miserable and that he was thinking about divorcing her. He even had the nerve to say he wanted to get back together with me, that he missed how we used to be and thought maybe we could start over, become a family again. Like, what? Did he forget why we ended in the first place? He was acting like none of that mattered, like I'd just forgive him and everything would go back to the way it was. At this point, I was furious. I couldn't believe the audacity. After everything he did, cheating on me with my own sister, abandoning me when I needed him the most, he had the nerve to ask me to take him back. It was like he didn't even understand what he'd done to me, or worse, maybe he just didn't care. I didn't respond right away. I just sat there, staring at my phone, thinking about all the ways I could tell him to screw off. Part of me wanted to just block him and move on, but another part of me, I don't know. I wanted him to know just how much he'd messed up. I wanted to say something that would hit him where it hurt, to make sure he knew there was no chance in hell I'd ever take him back. But then I realized, why should I waste any more energy on him? He didn't deserve my time, my thoughts, nothing. He was just trying to get a reaction out of me, trying to see if he still had some kind of control over my life. And you know what? I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. That's when I decided to write him back. But not with the angry rant I'd originally planned. Instead, I kept it short and to the point. I told him I was sorry that he was miserable, but that he had made his choice when he chose Lisa over me. I let him know that I was now happily married to someone who actually loved and respected me, and we were expecting our first child. I ended the email by telling him never to contact me again. I hit send, and that was it. It felt freeing in a way, like I was finally closing the door on that part of my life for good. I didn't need to explain myself to him anymore. He was part of my past, and that's where he was going to stay. A few hours later, he replied, I didn't want to read it, but curiosity got the best of me again. He said something about being stupid for thinking I'd wait for him and that no matter what, I'd always be his baby doll. Ugh, that nickname used to make me feel special. But now, it made me want to throw up. The way he wrote it, like he still thought he had some kind of claim on me, it was disgusting. That was the final straw. I blocked him after that and decided I wasn't going to give him any more space in my life. But it didn't stop there. A day or two later, I got an email from my mom and Lisa. Apparently, Mark had told them about my pregnancy, and they were both acting like nothing had ever happened. My mom was excited about becoming a grandmother, and Lisa, she actually had the nerve to say she couldn't wait to be the cool aunt. I couldn't believe it. These were the same people who turned their backs on me when I needed them most. The same people who betrayed me and took Mark's side when everything went down. Now they wanted to act like we were one big happy family. I was livid. I didn't respond to them. I didn't even bother. I just blocked them too. I didn't need their fake congratulations or their empty apologies. They weren't part of my life anymore, and they never would be. Eric was there through all of this. He held me when I cried, comforted me when I felt like I couldn't handle it, and reminded me that I had a new family now, a family that loved me for who I was and didn't try to tear me down. He's been my rock through all of this, and I don't know what I'd do without him. So yeah, that's where things stand now. Mark, Lisa, my mom, they're all out of my life for good, and I'm finally okay with that. I've got Eric, our baby on the way, and a future that looks brighter than it ever did before. They can keep their drama. I'm done with all of it. Update 2. After blocking Mark, Lisa, and my mom, I thought that would be the end of it. I mean, how many times can someone come back into your life and cause chaos before they just give up? I'd already moved on, found peace, and was building a future with Eric. But of course, life wasn't done throwing surprises my way. A couple of weeks after I sent that final email, I was just going about my day, trying to enjoy the calm for once. Eric had gone to work, and I was home, sorting out baby stuff. We were getting closer to my due date, so I was all about organizing the nursery, folding baby clothes, and planning how we were going to handle everything once our little one arrived. Then my phone buzzed. I figured it was one of those spam messages or some random notification, but when I picked it up and saw the name on the screen, I swear I nearly dropped the phone. It was Lisa. I hadn't spoken to her since I blocked her, so for her to pop up now made no sense. The only reason her message even came through was because she sent it from a new number. Honestly, part of me didn't even want to read it. I was done with her drama. But against my better judgment, I opened it. Lisa was saying that she needed to talk to me, that it was urgent and about the family. She didn't give any details, just kept begging me to call her back. I sat there for a good 5 minutes, debating whether I should just delete the message and pretend I never saw it. But something about the way she said it was urgent got to me. Like, was someone sick or something? My mom wasn't exactly young, and I hadn't heard anything about her in a while. I thought, fine, I'll just call her and get it over with. So I dialed the number. As soon as she picked up, Lisa launched into this whole sob story about how her life was falling apart. She sounded like she was crying, and at first I was too shocked to really say anything. She just kept going on and on about how she and Mark were splitting up, how he'd filed for divorce, and that he had been telling everyone that she was to blame for everything that went wrong. She said she felt like the whole world was against her, and she didn't know what to do. Now, here's where it got weird. She wasn't calling to apologize or even acknowledge what she did to me. No, she wanted me to help her. She was asking if I could talk to Mark, maybe smooth things over with him because, apparently, he still respected me, and she thought maybe I could convince him not to go through with the divorce. Can you believe that? I couldn't even process what she was saying. After everything she did to me, after betraying me in the worst way possible, she had the nerve to ask for my help in saving her marriage. It was like she completely forgot about how she destroyed mine. I couldn't hold back anymore. I cut her off mid-sentence and just let it all out. I told her exactly what I thought, how she was insane to think I'd help her, how I didn't care about what happened between her and Mark, and how she deserved every bit of misery she was going through. I reminded her of everything she'd done to me, how she'd wrecked my life, and how, frankly, I didn't give a damn about hers anymore. It was one of those moments where you just get it all off your chest and you don't even care about the consequences. It felt good to finally say it. I wasn't going to pretend to care about her problems, not after everything she'd done. Lisa tried to cut in, crying, saying she made a mistake, that she wasn't thinking straight back then. But it was too late for that. I wasn't interested in hearing her excuses. I told her straight up that she needed to deal with her own mess and leave me out of it. And before she could say anything else, I hung up and blocked her number again. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but of course it wasn't. A few days later, I get another message, this time from my mom. Apparently, Lisa had run crying to her after our conversation, and now my mom was trying to guilt trip me. She started going on about how family sticks together and how Lisa was really struggling right now and needed support. I couldn't believe it. My mom had always been on Lisa's side no matter what, but I thought maybe this time she'd realize how messed up things were. Nope. She went right back to defending Lisa, acting like I was the one who needed to reach out and make things right. I sent her a pretty blunt reply. I told her I wasn't interested in hearing any more about Lisa or Mark, that I'd moved on, and she should too. I reminded her how she'd taken Lisa's side all those years ago and that she had no right to tell me how I should feel or who I should support. I told her I wasn't going to be part of their lives anymore, and that if she couldn't accept that, then it was her problem, not mine. After that, I blocked her too. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their drama. I had my own life now, a new family that actually cared about me, and I wasn't about to risk that for people who only wanted me around when they needed something. And honestly, it was the best decision I ever made. The second I cut them off, I felt this weight lift off my shoulders. I didn't realize how much their negativity had been dragging me down until I was finally free from it. Eric noticed the change in me too. He told me I seemed lighter, happier. I guess I hadn't even realized how much I'd been holding on to until I finally let it go. It's funny how people who claim to be your family can be the ones who cause the most pain. But when you find the right people, the ones who truly love you, it makes all the difference. So that's where I'm at now. My focus is on my baby, my husband, and building a life that's full of love and peace, not drama. I don't need the chaos of my past anymore. I'm done with all of it. Sure, sometimes I wonder if they'll ever change, if they'll ever realize the damage they did. But honestly, it doesn't really matter to me anymore. They can keep living their lives the way they want, but I won't be a part of it. Not now. Not ever. Update 3. I'd like to say that after cutting off Lisa and my mom, everything just magically fell into place, and life was smooth sailing from there. But things are never that simple, right? Even when you think you've left the past behind, it sometimes finds a way of creeping back in. It was about 2 months after that whole mess with Lisa when the final straw came. I was at home, folding some baby clothes, thinking about how soon our little one would be here. I'd been feeling good. Really good, actually. Eric and I were in such a solid place, and everything felt right for the first time in years. Then, out of nowhere, I get a call from an unknown number. I didn't think much of it at first. I'd been getting a lot of spam calls lately, so I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. Maybe it was the pregnancy paranoia, or maybe it was just curiosity. I don't know. Either way, I answered. Hey, Jenna, it's Mark. I froze. I literally had no words. My brain was trying to process what was happening. How did he even get my number? I had blocked him from everything, hadn't spoken to him since that ridiculous email he sent me about wanting to get back together, and now here he was, casually calling me like we were old friends. Before I could even ask how he got my number, he jumped into this long rant about how everything was falling apart in his life. He said Lisa had moved out, filed for divorce, and had taken everything, including the car that he'd bought with our money back when we were married. He kept saying how unfair it was, how he didn't deserve this, and how he was completely alone. I didn't say a word. I just let him talk. And the more he talked, the more pathetic he sounded. It was like he didn't even realize how all of this was his own doing. He acted like he was the victim, like everything bad that was happening to him was some kind of cosmic punishment. Not once did he apologize for what he did to me, for how he treated me, or even acknowledge the fact that this whole mess started because he cheated on me with my sister. When he finally stopped talking, there was this long silence. I think he was waiting for me to say something, maybe comfort him or tell him it would all be okay. But I had nothing to say to him. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I wasn't anything. I was just done. So I simply said, Mark, you made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Don't call me again. And I hung up. I sat there for a minute, staring at my phone, just trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. It wasn't even about Mark at that point. It was the fact that, after everything he'd put me through, he still thought he had the right to reach out to me, to ask for help, to expect anything from me. I wasn't upset, though. I actually felt a sense of relief. That call was like the final chapter closing on everything I'd been through with him. I didn't need closure from Mark, and I definitely didn't need to help him fix his life. He wasn't my problem anymore, and that felt amazing. After that, things really did settle down. I blocked his number, of course, just to be sure he couldn't try contacting me again. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't have to worry about my past creeping back into my life. Eric and I continued preparing for the baby, and life was peaceful. It was almost surreal how quiet things had gotten after years of dealing with family drama and betrayal. It's like I was finally free to just live my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. When our baby girl finally arrived, it was like everything clicked into place. Holding her for the first time, I felt this overwhelming sense of love and protectiveness. It made me realize even more how important it was to keep toxic people out of my life. I wanted to give her the kind of family that was full of love and support, not the kind of chaos and betrayal that I had grown up with. Eric was the perfect partner through it all. He was there for every moment, every late night feeding, every diaper change, every breakdown when I felt overwhelmed. And every time I looked at him, I was reminded of how lucky I was to have found someone who truly cared about me. Someone who didn't just talk about love, but actually showed it every day in the way he treated me and our daughter. The best part? Eric's family embraced me like I was one of their own. His mom was constantly checking in on us, bringing over food, offering to help with the baby, and his dad was just as amazing. It was like I'd finally found the family I always wanted but never had. It wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who choose to show up for you, who actually care. And that's when I realized family isn't just the people you're born into. It's the people who stick by you, who support you, who love you no matter what. The ones who show up when you need them and don't disappear when things get hard. I might have lost my family along the way, but I gained something so much better. As for Mark and Lisa, I haven't heard from either of them since that last call. Part of me wonders what they're up to, if they finally managed to sort out their own mess. But honestly, it doesn't matter. They're not part of my life anymore, and I'm okay with that. I don't need them, and I don't miss them. What I have now, Eric, our daughter, and the life we're building together, that's all that matters. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that whatever comes next, I'm ready for it. And for the first time in a long time, I'm truly happy. So yeah, that's my story. I guess if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away from the people who hurt you, no matter how hard it is. It's not about holding grudges or being bitter. It's about choosing yourself, choosing happiness, and not letting anyone take that away from you. And for anyone who's going through something similar, I'll say this. Don't be afraid to cut out the people who don't deserve a place in your life. You deserve better. You deserve love, respect, and peace. Don't settle for anything less.